Welcome to the Bhagavad Gita in Action podcast. Actually, just the Gita in Action podcast, we call it. I'm Radha Priti, and I'm your host, along with this group of seekers that we have here today, the day after Christmas, dedicated seekers coming to the Gita Sangha. And we are in chapter 3 today. We are going through the Gita. We started, this is our 35th, I think, class. So we started a few months ago. We're in chapter 3. We're reading through and talking about the Gita and its relevance in our lives. So today we are on chapter 3, text 9. And we've been talking a lot about detached work. This chapter is called Karma Yoga, the yoga of detached work. And today we're gonna talk a lot about sacrifice and what that is in a spiritual context and also in our day-to-day lives. So with that, we'll get started here. Let me pull up database real quick. Like I said, this is text 9 of chapter 3. Oh, 1 second. A couple people just joined. Let me admit them. Sorry, we're a little clunky this morning. Okay, Trevor just joined. Gotta let Trevor in. All right, here we go. Text 9. Welcome, Trevor. Good to see you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So text 9 says, work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way you will always remain free from bondage. Okay, so there's a lot going on in this verse. The conclusion from text 3 through 8, the prior section, the overall conclusion is work. Right? Work. Don't renounce work. Arjuna was trying to decide if it would be better to renounce into the forest or to fight. And Krishna's telling him, don't renounce work, and telling us this is kind of a universal principle. So with that, Arjuna's question might still be, okay, if inaction is not good, then what about this work leading to bondage? You know, what about this work tying him to the material world? And this is where Krishna addresses that question in this verse. He says, yes, work does lead to bondage, except when you work in a mood of sacrifice. And that's where this theme, sacrifice, comes in. He's saying work for a higher cause, work for something beyond ourselves. And when we understand that we're a part of this reality bigger than ourselves, and we can function with that realization, we won't be bound. And that's the premise here. An example would be like a soldier in a war, and a soldier kills an enemy. But if he's in a war and he kills an enemy, this isn't considered wrong. It may even be rewarded because the soldier is not fighting for oneself. Whereas if the same soldier is in peaceful times and he just gets angry and he commits that same crime, the soldier will be punished, or that same deed. I guess it wouldn't be a crime if he was in a war, but if he performs that same action, he wouldn't be punished. Even though the action is the same, he wouldn't be punished because, or sorry, if it's in peaceful time and he kills someone, he would be punished. If he's in a war and he does, he wouldn't be punished. Okay, even if the action is the same, he would be punished if he does it for his own selfish desire, right? His own agenda, because that's not acceptable, right? But if he's working in the mood of sacrifice, a part of something bigger than himself, he's not bound or incriminated by those actions. So the mood of sacrifice is that it's not for my selfish gain, right? It's not for my selfish gain. I'm not killing the enemy because I'm angry at them and I want to get the anger out of me. It's for a bigger cause. And this is something that we'll be discussing in subsequent chapters as we move forward. But for us, if we can move around in this world, if we can do something, if we can act really selflessly, we won't get pulled in by the tricks of our ego, right? Because we aren't making it about us. In fact, we're trying to not make it about us. Right? Like a social worker who works for a greater cause. Maybe they're helping kids in impoverished communities, right? And they may face challenges. They may, not have money. They may get criticism. They may, face a whole host of challenges, but they remain committed to the mission of serving others, not gaining personal recognition or wealth. That's not their motive, and that's not what they're focused on. And therefore, the criticism that comes in, the obstacles that come in, they just kind of wash off their back. Right. And even when this happens, they don't get angry or frustrated because they aren't driven by their ego. They're not making it about them. That's when we get angry or frustrated, right? Is when we're driven by our ego, when we have an attachment, we have a certain desire, a way that we need it to come out for us to feel satisfied in our ego, right? Whether that's recognition, whether that's wealth, whatever it be, we've attached our ego to that. But when we can step outside of that and work outside of our ego and really just be committed to the mission, we won't get pulled in. We won't get pulled in by our ego. We'll get criticism, but it won't really faze us because we're not operating in that realm, right? We want to do our work to please God, and therefore we're not bound by the work, and we don't get the karmic reaction from it. And from that, we'll eventually be raised to the transcendental platform. And we talked about this before. If we're really sincere in our service to God, He'll reveal to us where we're attached and adverse and where we're stuck in our ego, where we're making it about us. And to that degree that our desire is to do this selfless service, He'll reveal where we're getting stuck. Right? So that's kind of the principle. And the hard part can be confronting our own intention and knowing it within ourselves, right? Because there's always going to be a little bit of ego in there. And that's where we're getting purified. Even if we're doing selfless service, even if we're this social worker who's really committed to this cause, and we'll see when the obstacles come up where we're feeling these feelings of attachment or fear or frustration. And that's where we know that we've kind of inserted ourself into that a little bit. We're not maybe as selfless as we think. Right? That's where we've kind of attached our ego. So that's again where we get purified, and that's these opportunities for growth and for our spiritual evolution. But we have to be careful because we can deceive ourselves and we can deceive others, and this is the danger in it. And we talked about that too, the danger of deceiving ourselves in this, in what our intentions are. But the capacity, so this is the next point. This is a good point. The capacity to trade the present for the future is a defining human characteristic, right? This is what separates us from animals. Because if we were just here just to mate, just to eat, just to defend, right? That's just exactly what animals do. Right? But we can trade the present for the future, meaning the fact that we can trade pleasure in the current moment to focus on creating better arrangements for our future moments. This is what separates us from animals, the capacity that the human can do this, right? Like when a student decides to study for final exams that are coming up rather than hanging out with friends or watching TV, this leads to greater sense of satisfaction and freedom in the long run, right? And the human has a capacity to understand that, to make that decision, to understand the consequences, the trade-off, right? And this very thing is the principle of sacrifice. This is the principle that Krishna is trying to teach us here. And he does this universally, but we can zoom in and see this in our own lives and how it's beneficial, right? We can zoom in and see how it's beneficial in our own lives, this principle of sacrifice. And then we're going to zoom out and really see how it's beneficial in our relationship with God. Right? But this principle, it's done in various cultures around the world, not just to appease God, but to empower humans to improve themselves like that. So in the zoomed in level, the most zoomed in level, this principle of sacrifice, if we can practice it, this sense of, what do they call it in psychology? Delayed sense gratification. We'll see improvement, like if in our working out habits, our eating habits, or studying for test, or if we can practice this, we'll see improvement in our own lives. But we see it across religion as well. This is a principle that is across various religions that God is trying to teach us. in our relationship with God, our relationship with others, our relationships with ourselves, right? There's so much in this just one principle, so much fulfillment, so much self-improvement, so much evolution that can happen if we can really practice this. And even, yesterday was Christmas. We talk about Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. I mean, that's a huge, that's like the basis of Christianity, right? This sacrifice that Jesus makes. He sacrifices himself to bear the punishment of sin for everybody, right? So this principle comes up everywhere. And we're going to learn about how specifically it comes up in the Gita and what God's trying to teach us through that. But Prabhupada says, back to the Gita, Prabhupada says that sacrifices recommended in Vedic literature are for the satisfactions of demigods, are a sort of inducement to the sacrificers to realize the existence of higher authorities. So the purpose of sacrifice is to realize something bigger than yourself, right? That's the purpose of sacrifice. And God teaches us that through our relationship with him. And also, so that we can function healthily in around our environment and our societies and our families and our relationships here. But when we can sacrifice our consciousness, sacrifice can take us from bondage in material consciousness to liberation in spiritual consciousness. So just like all these other spiritual principles, we get to practice it right here. We see benefits in our lives, in our relationships, in our work. But ultimately, if we can practice it in our relationship with God, we see the ultimate benefit. And we'll talk more about both of those as we go on. But would anyone like to share anything about that before we go to the next verse? Anything that resonated with you, or any pluses or minuses? Gita says that. I like that. Pluses or minuses. Okay, we can move on to the next verse then. And if something comes up, please just raise your hand. So 3:10. 3:10 says, in the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, be thou happy by this yajna, which means sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. Okay, there's a lot going on here, and we're going to talk about the concept of demigods and what they are and how they relate, because that I know I used that word a little bit ago too, and we'll dive into that a little bit more so that it makes more sense in the context of what we're talking about. But text 3-8, again, is about how action is better than premature renunciation. We established that. Action is better than premature renunciation. The 9th verse, the verse we just talked about, is a transition about how work as a sacrifice is, if one works as a sacrifice, one will not get implicated, right? So that's a little bit further of an elaboration on how we work in this world without getting tied to it, right? So the theme of working as a sacrifice is going to be elaborated in this section. And so we're going to get deeper and deeper into it as we move through. So the rationale for sacrifice, Krishna is giving a backdrop for that. He's saying that when the universe was created, at that time, the creator of the universe created an entire cosmic system. So just hold on, because we're going to talk about sacrifice at all of the levels. The zoomed in level of you and how you're navigating in your relationships and your environment, and then the way zoomed out level of the cosmic universal level. And we'll see how they all relate. But again, just like anything, we're trying to practice these principles at every level. And every level, like when we practice them in our material lives, it helps us understand them at the bigger level, and also vice versa. So they also are interrelated in that way as well. But right now we'll go back to this universal cosmic level. He's saying that when the universe was created, at that time, the creator of the universe created an entire cosmic system. And in that, there was a system for cooperation. So in Gita, from the Gita philosophy, we have humans on earth, and then we have heavens. And demigods, the demigods live in the heavens. And the demigods are not God. There's only one God, but the demigods are more like posts, like managerial posts in the universe that are responsible for certain aspects of the universe. Kind of like if a CEO has a huge company, he's going to divide up the responsibilities of the company and give it to different departments. In that same way, that's the role of the demigods, and that's what we call them, demigods, and they live in the heavens, right? And there's a cooperative system between the humans on the earth and the demigods in the higher systems, right? We offer something to them, and they offer something to us. So in this system, what we offer to the divine is sacrifice. And when we offer that sacrifice, we get blessings. And that blessings is in terms of resources for living. So you'll have like a demigod is responsible for rain, or, you know, all the resources that we need for living. We kind of have that cooperative system. God set up that cooperative system with these authorities so that we can start to make spiritual progress, and we also can get everything that we need. This is kind of the principle of the Gita. So this can seem esoteric. This can seem esoteric. So again, we'll start zoomed in. We'll start at this level, that's most zoomed in level, and then we'll expand back out to the universal level to better understand this and how they relate, and how this principle is really seen everywhere in any relationship we have, or any mode of functionality that we have in this existence. If we can practice this principle, we'll benefit in one way or another. We'll benefit. So we'll go zoomed in, and we'll work out, and we'll refine all the details as we go. Okay, are you guys with me? Is this making sense? Okay, so if we're starting in at the most zoomed in level, I'm the most zoomed in level, right? My little baby, I think, can only conceive of that. Her maybe not even that. I'm not even sure she knows her existence separate from me yet. But we're most zoomed in. We're looking at me. Our action is generally motivated by whatever situation I'm in, what I want to do, and what I'm afraid of, right? If we all think about the way that we move around in this world, those are the three motives that we have when we're moving around in this world. So sacrifice means that we can give up some immediate pleasure so that we can get to some higher purpose. We see this principle in action with athletes who train really hard for an event, right? They're trading their present for some future success. And this is one of the key characteristics of success. Right? Psychology, we talked about, psychology calls it impulse control or delayed gratification. Right? If we can give up something in the present, then we can get something much more in the future. It's a basic principle of sacrifice. In psychology, there's a marshmallow test. Have you heard of this marshmallow test? The first time I heard of, you have heard of the marshmallow test? Oh, that's good. So they give each kid a marshmallow, and they tell them that if they wait to eat it, they'll get another one. So in this, we have the grabbers and the resistors. The grabbers are the kids who don't care, and they're just going to keep eating marshmallows. And the resistors are the ones that wait so that they can get more. Psychologists found that 20 years later, the resistors had greater success in career, relationships, and personal well-being. Right? They found that this is required everywhere in life, this ability to trade the present for the future. Right? And so sacrifice is a fundamental principle of existence. The Gita takes this principle further and expands it into an entire world view. So whether you start up at the Gita and you're learning these principles and you apply them to your life and see success, or whether you're on the inside working out, we're going to see the same principle and the same thing that Krishna is trying to teach us. So again, we'll go back to the higher cosmic level now. Consider the universe to be just like a universal government, right? Just like in a government, well, so in the universal government, there's gods. We talked about that, the demigods, that are the cosmic administrators, right? They have posts. We call them gods, but they're demigods. They're not actually God. They're posts. So they're like representatives of God, right? And just like in the government, we have ministers that have different roles. The gods or the demigods are cosmic administrators. And just like in the government, we pay taxes. When we have this relationship with the demigods, that's where we call that sacrifice. We have sacrifice. Taxes are like sacrifice. And when we can do that, when we can sacrifice, we're harmoniously functioning within this universe. So in the same way that we have to have this reciprocal relationship with, your friend or your spouse or your workplace, we have this reciprocal relationship. That's the only way it really works. God is telling us we have to have the same kind of relationship with our higher authorities, right? With God. And we can do that through these demigods. That's what the Gita is saying here. We'll learn now that in this time, there's a different way of sacrifice that's recommended for this age and for us specifically. But that's what the Gita is explaining is happening here. The concept that the Gita is trying to explain through this. So right from the beginning of creation, sacrifice was given to all humanity. And the key point that Krishna is elaborating, he's elaborating on a worldview that will be expanded in subsequent sections, right? Because Arjuna's on a battlefield and he's trying to make a decision based off of what he sees in front of him, right? And we talked about that too. Krishna's different zoomed in perspectives, right? When he's just seeing it with material vision versus what Krishna's doing. He's looking at it even broader, and he's looking at the universal view, and he's saying that sacrifice is one of the defining features of the universe. And that's the perspective that he's coming from when he's talking to Arjuna about what he should do and explaining these universal principles from us. We talked about that. Krishna's in this wider arena, this zoomed out version, and Arjuna is very focused on this material implications. Does that make sense? Are you guys still with me? Okay, I see some thumbs up. Good. Feel free to jump in or interrupt at any time. Okay, so now we'll go to 311. 311 says the demigods, again, these administrators, these posts, being pleased by sacrifices will also please you. And thus by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. So he's saying if the government is competent and we are law-abiding, facilities will come. Right. Similarly, Krishna is saying here that the demigods and the humans work cooperatively, they both can flourish. And this will be described more in subsequent verses, but it's the simple idea of cooperation. So in the verse before, he said, do sacrifice and you won't be bound to this material world. Now he's saying you participate in this sacrifice, this reciprocal relationship with these demigods, and you'll both benefit. Everybody will benefit. This is, again, the simple principle of cooperation. And we see that in our lives, in our relationships. If we have this reciprocal relationship with a person, both benefit. That's the inherent definition. But if one party is a taker and one's a giver, it's not very sustainable, right? And it's not very fulfilling. And also the connection is not very strong, right? So again, we need to have this same principle of reciprocity in our relationship with God, as we know that we need to have with our spouse, with our children, with our friends, for these relationships to be sustainable and fulfilling and to get the most connection out of them, right? We need to have the same relationship with God. And what God is explaining to Arjuna is how to do that through the demigods. And we'll learn, and we'll talk about today also, what the recommended sacrifice is for us in this age. But the principle is the same, and that we have to have that reciprocity to evolve. We have to have that kind of relationship with God. So now we'll go to 312. 312 says, in charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of sacrifice, will supply all necessities to you. But he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. So he's continuing the analysis here that if we're taking facilities or amenities or utilities from the government, then we have to return something, right? If we stay in a hotel and we take facilities, we have to pay. If we're using a road system, we have to pay. And if we don't, we're breaking the law and we become like a thief, right? When we take things, we need to return. This is just the way for a cooperative, successful society to work. And we all get frustrated at people that don't, right? We see that all around us too. People that don't practice this principle, maybe they're, not paying their taxes, or maybe, they're claiming unemployment and not working, but taking advantage of the systems that we have. And people get frustrated about that. right? It's because we feel that we have that sense of responsibility in this society that we need to contribute and we need to do our part and we need to have this reciprocal relationship for it all to function well. Because the reality is, if everybody had that kind of mindset that, I'll just take and I don't really need to give anything back, or I don't really need to be responsible, it wouldn't function. None of us would survive. If it was an entire society or culture of that kind of mindset, right? So that's what Krishna's saying here. This is a principle. It's essential for survival. And it's essential for your relationship with divinity. We shouldn't be like a fountain, or we should be like a fountain and not a drain, right? We should be like a fountain and not a drain. And if in any relationship we start feeling that we're only taking and not giving, it won't work. In a job, we'll get fired. A family, it will create instability and unhappiness. Any relationship we can think about, and we've probably all had relationships like that, where either we realized that we were taking more than we were giving, or the person that we were with was taking more than they were giving, and how that made us feel, right? And how sustainable that was. And it's probably not real sustainable to be with somebody long term where there's a pretty big misbalance, or where there's quite a and if we're in that, and if we're the takers, it's not even fulfilling to us, right? It's not even, I don't know if anybody's ever been on that side where you're taking more, but it's not even fulfilling. I know when I left my job to pursue spiritual life, and my husband was so supportive. I wasn't working and I wasn't contributing in that way. And it was like, I felt pretty bad about that. It was like actually pretty hard for me to feel like I wasn't contributing much in that way. And my husband was like, super supportive. But then when we had a kid, which is like my husband's lifelong dream. And I wanted a child, but it wasn't like I had to, or I would be, unhappy. My husband is very like, it's like his dharma in this life to have a child. So it like made me feel so good that to be able to do that. It made me feel like, now I could do something to make my husband happy, even though it also made me happy. It just made me feel like, okay, the balance is a little bit restored, because, it doesn't feel good if you feel like you're taking more than you're giving. And I've also been on the other side of that, where I felt like I was giving so much and the person was just taking. And after a while, it's depleting. It's like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I have nothing else to give. So it's so important for sustainability in relationships that there's this balance, and it might not be like in the moment. It might not always be balanced. Like I said, the first couple of years of our marriage, it wasn't like that. Well, I didn't feel like it was. My husband would say that it was, but I didn't feel like it was. But over time, we need to have some kind of balance. There needs to be this principle of reciprocity for things to be successful and connecting. So similarly, within this universe, the idea is that we're taking and we need to be giving. Right? Everything is given to us by the Lord. We might think that we supply it, but we don't, right? Food, light, heat, water, air. We might think that we get these things from the grocery store, or we pay our electric bill, but all the ability to have all of these things so it's supplied by God, not mankind. Mankind might step in and do some kind of, to have some kind of step in the process, but ultimately the main source is God. Right? And thinking that mankind provides all of these essentials, it's like a child thinking that like he gets his food from the refrigerator, not that the parents buy it, right? It's like it's just an intermediate step. It's not actually the source. So we have to acknowledge that's the actual source. Every breath you take, every apple you eat, everything that we have around us is supplied by God. And the purpose of all of these things is to keep the body fit and healthy for the purpose of self-realization. That's what Krishna says in the Gita, leading to the ultimate goal of life, which is liberation from the struggle for material existence. So we shouldn't be taking what the Lord gives us and using it for our own sense gratification. This is entangling, and it won't lead to long-lasting happiness or fulfillment. And we become like a thief. right? If we're just taking it and we're just using it for our own pleasure without any acknowledgement of who gave it to us, where it's coming from, we're just almost acting like we got it ourselves. We become like a thief, and we'll become punished by the laws of material nature, and we'll learn how those laws work as well, but we'll suffer karmic reactions for that. So this principle of reciprocation, it's done through sacrifice. Material creation is a chance offered to us, to the conditioned souls, to come back to Godhead. We're here because we forgot our relationship with God. And the Vedic principles are intended to help us remember this relationship and understand God. And they do this by teaching us to perform sacrifice so that we can live comfortably without anxiety. And after finishing the present material body, we can enter into the kingdom of God. So by performing this sacrifice, conditioned soul gradually becomes God conscious and godly in all respects. So when we talk about this age where we're all the age of hypocrisy and quarrel, it's called the age of Kali. It's just this time that we're in. Does anybody know the recommended sacrifice for us in this age? Can somebody share the recommended sacrifice for us in this age?
Sankirtan.
Sankirtan. And Sankirtan is the chanting of the names of God. This is the recommended sacrifice for us. This principle of reciprocity, how we reciprocate with God and all that he does for us and connect with God, is chanting of the names, right? So other yajnas, other forms, there's been, for every age, there's different recommended sacrifice. And that's actually kind of the beauty of this age, is that in other ages, past times before, they're not as easy to perform, and they take a lot more time and discipline and commitment, and you don't get as much mercy from them. But in this age, we do. That's all we have to do. Chant the names of gods. That's the recommended sacrifice for this age. It's easy and it's sublime for all purposes. So in that way, this age it's quarrel and hypocrisy. It's categorized by quarrel and hypocrisy. So from that aspect, it's not so great. But the ultimate sacrifice, the sacrifice that we need, that God's recommending to connect with him, is just chanting the names. It's easy. And in that way, we get a lot of mercy in this age. So in these texts, Krishna is giving us a much bigger vision of work that we do. Right? When we're playing our role, now we're going to go back to the zoomed in version. When we're playing our role in a particular role in life, it makes significant difference, right? If one wants to live responsibly, it's a life of sacrifice. And we see that is what's really even fulfilling, right? I feel that way now with having a child. Like, I don't think I have anything of my own anymore. I'm lucky to get like an hour a day to do this, to prepare for the podcast and to give the podcast. That's like, I'm lucky to get that. Other than that, I'm just like, tending to all of her needs. And I actually feel like in that, I'm like, wow, what was the purpose of life before? It's like, this has given my life such incredible meaning and fulfillment, even though like tending to all her needs basically means that I don't tend to mine. Like if I'm hungry, I just wait until I have an opportunity. If I'm holding her for hours and hours and I have to go to the bathroom, I just wait. If I'm thirsty and I lean over and it wakes her, I just wait, so it's like all of my needs are like second fiddle. But at the same time, and I think parents, I'm just learning this, but parents can probably relate. There's nothing more fulfilling, right? There's nothing that makes you feel more like, it's kind of a crazy concept, but this is what really makes us the happiest, right? So sacrifice. So back to Arjuna, when we talk about Arjuna on the battlefield, the sacrifice of life is dramatic, but what's more transformative is a life of sacrifice. So to give up your life is noble, but what's the most transformational is to live a life of sacrifice, to live for something higher than yourself, something bigger than yourself, right? Just like a country is nothing more than accumulation of its individual citizens. Right? A country becomes great when the citizens work hard and are responsible, and every citizen has a role to play. Right? That's when a country functions the best. Similarly, Krishna is telling Arjuna that the work that he does will contribute not just to him winning a war and getting a kingdom, but it'll contribute to cosmic harmony, right? And this will be explained further in the next session. But this is a very empowering vision of humanity and human activity, right? Each one of us is small, but we're not worthless. We have a significant role to play. And what that role is and how we're participating in the universal system of cooperation, we'll discuss in the next class. But this is something for us all to think about in our individual lives, just for our own happiness and well-being and connection and satisfaction. What are we doing? What's our life of sacrifice? What's going to be our something that we're involved in that's bigger than ourselves? And then also in our relationship, as we zoom out further and further out, how are we connecting with God in this way? How are we reciprocating for all that God's given us? And the more that we can incorporate this principle in every aspect, every level of our lives, ultimately, the more satisfaction, happiness, fulfillment, connection that we're going to experience. So, what do you guys think about that? Please, somebody share. I've been talking so much. Mariah, you're off mute. Great.
Oh yeah, I just left it off. I mean, I have lots of thoughts, but I don't know how to. I think it's interesting reading this and hearing that, sacrifice to the demigods was recommended at one point. I mean, obviously I kind of knew that, but I guess growing up in ISKCON, it's kind of like there was always like an air of like, you're almost bad if you're like looking to the demigods, but I can understand that it's not for the purpose of like worship the demigods for material gain, but we could still honor the demigods as the administrative post, as parts and parcels, like, as devotees of the Lord. So I just find it interesting that it actually says in here that at one point it was recommended to do that. And whereas now it's more like, I mean, I know ultimately Krishna came for like Govardhan Puja and he was like, don't worship the demigods, just worship me. And, but it's just, it's just like reconciling that like misconception that I had, I guess, growing up of like, like you're always told like you don't need to worship the demigods, but it was almost like frowned upon if you did like have pictures or images of them, whereas now it's like not as, even when you go to like, the temple, you can see all the different deities and murtis of them. So it's interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, they play a very important role in the Vedas because, as we talked about a lot, the beauty of the Vedic system is that it's progressive. So people that aspire more for material opulence approach the demigods for this, because the demigods are in charge of the different departments of material opulence. Basically, if you want a child, you want a son, you pray to a certain demigod, and they'll grant that for you. So in this way, the Vedas are progressive and that they can reach anybody where they're at. So if somebody comes to spiritual life and is still very materially attached, it says, okay, here's what you can do. You can have this kind of relationship with God. We talked about this before, this karma kanda kind of relationship with God, where you pray for things and then God fulfills your order. But in that way, we're starting to learn this principle of sacrifice. We're starting to have this reciprocal kind of relationship with God. We offer something, and then through the post of his demigods, he fulfills it. And if we're attached to material opulence, then that fulfills that for us, and we can also make some kind of advancement. We can make some kind of progress on the spiritual path. What to speak of, the next step to that would be when you start to understand material opulence, not just in this life, but in the next, right? And so then we start to zoom out a little bit. And in that, we start to understand the internality of the soul. And that's another milestone in our spiritual evolvement and evolution, right? We start to understand that the soul's journey is eternal.
Yeah.
And then the next step to that, we can then maybe engage in some attached work. It's a ladder. But the point is that the demigods, that kind of reciprocal relationship, it could serve somebody somewhere, wherever they are. If they're after material opulence, it can serve them, and it can teach them that principle of sacrifice. But I think that, again, the reason that in devotee culture, when we say devotee culture, ISKCON, what we try to, the kind of relationship we try to aspire to have with God is one of, whatever God's will for me is what my desire is. We want to serve God. We don't want to approach God for material things. So that's why we don't want to necessarily, worship the demigods. But yeah, like what you said, we still honor and respect them. But we're aspiring for this bhakti, this relationship with God that's really more of one of surrendering, in a mood of surrender. Whatever God's will is what I want in my life. And that's at a different place on the ladder. But the point is, wherever you are, you can make progress.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, I'm going to bring up another aspect in my life of when I kind of like was going a Christian route. Like I was looking into a lot of Christianity, and, I could always see the similarities. One is like, there's a whole book of Psalms where it's just all about, praise the Lord's name. Right. And so I think that's cool because it's like connection, like for this day and age, singing his name is the way. Right. But then there's also like the other side that I had experienced of like, Jesus is the only way, and reject all other religions and idols and this and that, which I can see now. Like, I don't know, this kind of is bringing me clarity to that of like, reject it in the sense of we only need this prescribed method, but we don't have to reject it in the sense that we become like condemning towards it. And I think I'm just kind of like healing my mindset of that kind of like, we don't have to condemn these other things. We can see the place that they served, but this is what's recommended. Just like, chant his holy name, take shelter of a pure devotee, and that's that. Like, so that's kind of what's coming to me today.
Yeah. And that's what bhakti gives us, is that kind of shortcut to connection with God. That shortcut meaning that, like just what you said, we associate with devotees and we chant God's names, and that's the process. And that level of surrender that we're aspiring for is the goal. And in that, the process and the goal is really the same. And I was listening to a lecture the other day, and I heard, the way that Prabhupada would teach devotees to pray. It's not like we can't pray for, if our friend's sick and we want to pray for our friend to heal, but he would preface it with, if this is your desire, God, please help my friend heal. Or if this is your desire, please let me live a little bit longer so that I can further your mission. Or, we're more concerned about God's desire for us than what we think we want out of life to be happy. And that's our ultimate goal in this process, is that level of surrender.
Yeah. Thank you.
Trevor, I saw your hand up. Are you able to share?
I might not have service now. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I'm on the road in the mountains, so you might lose me. I was gonna bring up a point on the demigod worship that might help people, because it's common confusion. It's a matter of consciousness, and in Christianity, they kind of scare people away from Krishna consciousness, and they have this view that we're worshiping so many different beings as God. And they say that we're idol worshiping, so to say. But the only thing that makes it idol worshiping is a lack of consciousness. Whether if you're looking at Shiva and you think he's Krishna, that's offensive to God. If you're worshiping a demigod and you're seeing them as God, that's where it becomes offensive. And like you said, Radha, worshiping for material purposes, that's also not ideal, because the idea is to become conscious and purify your consciousness. But the worship of Krishna through the medium of a demigod is exception. Just like we worship Krishna through the medium of a spiritual master, that's where it's not offensive. It's more like becoming the servant of the servant in that sense. So you're giving them respect, giving Krishna love through their hearts, through their portals, acknowledging their significance and devotion to service and their posts. So there's plenty of devotees who actually worship some of the demigods to obtain higher consciousness, and that was accepted. Like, for example, the gopis worshipped Durga to have Krishna as their husband. So they were actually worshiping Krishna, but using Durga to help them get to Krishna.
We don't actually want to worship the demigods.
Right, right.
We want to honor. That relationship is one like of more reverence. Like we want to honor them and their role, but we don't actually want to worship them. And it's actually not recommended to worship them to get to God. It's just recommended just to worship God directly. So even like if you have a deity or anything, we don't worship demigod deities or anything. Like that's
Exactly.
not Prabhupada's recommended process. Is that consistent with what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a common confusion, because it comes down to, are you putting them in place of God, or are you worshiping, or are you using your love through their medium to get to God? It's okay if we're helping each other along the way on the path, but whenever we mistaken a person or a demigod as God, that's where it becomes offensive.
Yeah, and I have like statue. I have like a statue of like yeah, I have like a statue of like Ganesh in my house just because I like Ganesh. But I don't worship the statue or Ganesh or treat it like a deity or anything like that. But I have him like on a little bit elevated platform, and I honor him, but I don't worship him. Yeah, thank you.
I understand what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Nild, please share.
Yeah, I think this is related to what we were talking about on Christmas Eve. I went to a Christmas Eve service at my wife's Methodist church, and there was a live enactment, and there was it was incredibly moving. It helped me feel I was in the presence of the divine. And I grew up a Methodist, so I knew some of the I knew many of the kind of the normal things that would happen there. And I felt at home there. I didn't feel that I was not in the right place. And then last night, with my daughter's husband's family, we lit the menorah, or the dad lit the menorah candles, and we chanted. So I was chanting last night to the menorah candle, and on Tuesday Eve, Christmas Eve, I was singing and praising the divine there. So I think we can all, if we are all truly one, we are all able to praise the divine in the way that brings us joy and brings us closer to a feeling that the divine within. And the minister at the Methodist Church, which I was surprised to hear, he did a meditation where we felt the divine within, Jesus within, and enabling us to know that we had the powers that Jesus had, that we had the divine power. So, and I also love to chant. Interestingly, my wife was in the live creche. She was playing one of the kings, and while I was waiting for her, I was chanting and doing mantras. So it and then the service started, and I shifted gears. So I don't know. It was really wonderful couple days. And here I am with you guys.
It's so beautiful. Yeah, Prabhupada would say, if you have a relationship with Jesus, chant the names of Jesus. It doesn't have to be, it's just chanting God's names is universal, as are a lot of these principles. Most of these principles, this principle of sacrifice is universal, and it's God's trying to teach us this through the Bible, right? In the Old Testament, sacrifices were a central part of the law God gave to the Israelites. Animals were sacrificed as a way to atone for sins. And these sacrifices symbolize the need for a substitute to bear the punishment for sin. And then Jesus became the ultimate sacrifice, right? The Son of God. He was uniquely qualified to serve as the ultimate sacrifice. And he bore the punishment for humanity's sins so that humans could be reconciled to God. But this principle of sacrifice, again, that's like paramount to the Christian religion. And the point is, we see this in the Gita. God is trying to teach us how to have this relationship with him, with this reciprocal relationship of sacrifice with him through, whatever. And he gives us in the Vedas, he gives us different ways to do it. And there's different recommendations for different ages and depending on where you are. But what we're learning here, it's the demigods, but like what we said, chanting of the holy names is now the recommended sacrifice. But the principle is the same, sacrifice. We see it for all ages, all cultures, all times. This is important. This is integral to any relationship that you have, starting with yourself and the sacrifices that you make to have a healthy, fit body or disciplined mind, right? Out to your relationship with your spouse, with your kids, with your family, with your society, with your culture, all the way with God. And we'll see this, the more we can practice this and live this, again, the more happier, connected, fulfilled that we'll be. And we see this through, I love that you said that, and you can feel that divinity in church. It's beautiful because it's there. It's there, and these principles are there.
I was sitting in the church, and I was listening to Leonie's chant and kind of chanting silently. So it was because there were several things I hadn't, and in the group chat I hadn't. I went back and I looked at Tom's video, and but yeah, it was really sweet. So thank you, Leonie, for providing that church for me.
That's beautiful. Yeah, if you're not on our group chat, if you go to the Seeker's Quest thread, and at the top, I think I pinned the link for it. You can see all, like, we kind of will share throughout the week. People will share different realizations or spiritual offerings, or it's a way we can further connect throughout the week with each other. And yeah, Anita, I think I saw your hand up. I think you might have took it down, but we'd love to hear from you.
Hi. So I think that I just wanted to share some information. And it's regarding the demigods, and it might take longer than the time that we have. But coming from Guyana, and I agree with what you said, that worshiping the demigods or praying to them, it is at a different level for those people, and it might help them to aspire to a higher level. But coming from Guyana, and this is a whole nation, a whole country of Hindus who are all brought up the same way, worshiping or praying to the demigods. That's how we were all brought up. There many of them, or us, did not know about the ultimate God of Lord Krishna or whoever. We just worship. Like in my house, I have a whole room of all the demigods, all of them, and I do pray to all of them. But do I ask for anything? I don't ask for anything. I just acknowledge that they are there, and they're also important for their aspect in the universe. But there are many Hindus throughout the world And even in India, where this all started, that don't have the understanding of what we are learning through you explaining the Bhagavad Gita as it is. They don't have no idea in many, many millions of Hindus um, of the higher energy and the higher concept of God. And so, yes, they might worship a separate or specific demigod for certain aspect of what they need. And um, I try in my temple, my mandir, and it's a perfect example. It's a Guyanese mandir where people, they're born into it. We were all born into this religion, and yet we don't have the understanding of what it really is. We're living it. And I'm trying to explain to them that yes, you do, they're so engrossed in doing the worshiping and the rituals, and telling them that yes, it's okay to do that, but there's also this higher concept, the higher spirituality, the one-to-one. But I don't think that they're getting it. I don't think they're getting it. And so I'm saying, okay, it's okay. We'll continue doing the if that's the level at which they are, then maybe it will contribute to good karma in this life. And then maybe in their next life they might they might come with some higher understanding of it. But yes, I do have all the demigods in my house, and I do pray to them, and I do acknowledge that they are there. And yes, I understand there was the one person with the ISKCON who said that they don't have the demigods, and they think that worshiping them was not the right thing to do. And so yes, it causes a rift between um regular Hindus who worship them, and then when they're gonna look at the ISKCON who don't acknowledge them in any form, then sometimes they want to keep away from them. But I do agree with everything that you have said there. And for me personally, I have evolved in understanding it so much more since I have been listening to Veda explaining the Gita. And thank you all so much, and thank you so much. But I just wanted to add that because it is so many people who don't have that understanding, and they may never get it in this whole life. They will live their life and they will never get it. That yes, there's more, there's higher energy, there's Krishna, and where we came from and to where we're going, and the soul. Thank you. Thank you so much.
That was so nice. Thank you for the background. And it's so wonderful that you had that experience and that, that kind of relationship. And I love what both you and Trevor said, that, it's that we have that appreciation of the demigods for their roles, but our ultimate relationship of, we recognize that the real source is through God. And it's just that consciousness that we approach them with. So thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Is there anything else before we adjourn for the day here?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for sharing that also. And I like the way that you put it, like, yeah, they're doing it, and they don't really know why they're doing it, the demigod worship, and you're trying to help them see, like, hey, let's do this to reach to the higher stage of connecting with the Supreme Lord. And it reminded me of the class. I re-listened to the class from last Thursday, and you were talking about the 4 levels of work and renunciation. And you were like, you were describing it like really quickly, but you were like, sometimes this could take lifetimes. And I think that's like, that's the level they're at. and that's still good. And it might take another lifetime or two. Some might get it in this lifetime, that their demigod worship is ultimately to lead them to worshiping the higher supreme Lord, the source of them. And yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting
Yeah.
connection to all that. Like, it just puts it all in a bigger perspective of like, there is something for everybody at every level. Krishna is always coming to us in some form or way, you know? So
Yeah, and that's what the Gita text 3 or chapters 3 through 6, as we continue on, we'll learn more about this progression, and that it will take us on. That it's again, the Vedas, like what you just said, anybody at any level can have this. It will teach you how to have this relationship with God. And ultimately, what's most important is the heart, right? And even if you're, like Anita said, if you're in that realm where you're worshiping demigods, but you have a bhakti heart, I mean, who's to say that you won't meet a devotee in this lifetime or the next, and then have, you know, everything will blossom for you, and you'll have this really strong relationship with God and go back to Godhead in that life, you know? So as long as we're somewhere and we're practicing with heart, and we're practicing that essence, we're making progress. And who's to say how fast, you know, or where you are. So it's beautiful. Thank you. Okay, well, I will see you all then on Monday. Thank you for coming and discussing and sharing your hearts, and all the shares today were so great. Anita, it was great hearing from you, hearing that real experience you have. Thank you. Thank you all. We'll see you Monday.
Thank you all.